Welcome back to the living room. My name is Joe Young. Last week we talked about how important it was to have a concept of your living room being your safe haven, your church, your Garden of Eden, as it were, where really the future can blossom and be shaped and cultivated. You know, we are shaped a lot of times by what we're surrounded by. Our conscience is shaped that way. You know, if we see, oh, everybody's doing it, then we feel our conscience, it's something that happens unnoticed. But our conscience shifts and changes as we see what's going on around us. And the last week's message was sort of a plea, as it were, to take your living room very seriously and as an opportunity to grow your family and put a tone on your life of connecting to God and to connecting to one another in true love. This is a continuation of that message. If there was one thing I hope that we could all think about teaching ourselves or teaching our loved ones or teaching the next generation, if you are a parent, that one thing, what would that one thing be? That one thing, in my view, is to connect to God more intimately, to be opened to connecting to God's love, God's voice, God's strength, and so on. This should be the purpose of education in the church. This should be the only purpose of education for churches and faith education. You know, this, if you think about it, this is really what Jesus was teaching about. He gave us so many amazing parables, but really it was always to show us something about God so that we could know Him more intimately. Being connected to God. Once you're connected to God, the rest really doesn't matter. And there's a lot that goes into this, how once we're connected to God, we start following our conscience, and how that may seem contrary to the way of the world around us. But Jesus gave so many parables. You know that we all know the prodigal son, right? The prodigal son, we know the phrase at least. You know, that's not a parable. That's not a story about a son. That's not a story about a father and a son. That is a story about God. Jesus tells the story that even if the prodigal son goes away and leaves the village shamefully and blows all the money and he gambles it away and he does everything irresponsible and he does everything against the parents' wishes and he doesn't write, he doesn't call, he doesn't write. He blows all the money that his father gave him. And even in that circumstance, if the son returns to the village, returns home, and the father sees his son a long way off returning into the village, the father would run to the son, run as fast as he could to embrace his son in tears. It's an amazing parable because at Jesus' time, people of any status don't run. And I've related this in a previous talk about, think of the billionaires or the millionaires of the world, right? Like the people I play music for sometimes in these fancy hotels. Well, sometimes I'm sitting there playing music and I'm looking around and the only people running are the busboys. The only people running are the people with like dishes to carry to prepare the table. The guy who's there with the nicest suit on with the Rolls Royce in the valet, he's not running. I guarantee you that. And that sentiment was actually even more exaggerated in Jesus' time. People of status used to wear long flowing robes so that they literally couldn't run. They had to walk gracefully as their robes dangled by their feet. And here comes Jesus, somebody from the sticks, somebody from the countryside, the uneducated part of town, coming in and saying, if God sees his son returning, he would humiliate himself and run in tears to meet his son. It's a beautiful story. But the point of this stories is not to become Bible buffs. The point of the story is that you take that and you go, wow, that's what God's like? Wow. The point is though that you can feel an intimacy with God. That should be, and that's my view of the sole purpose of spiritual education. And I gotta say, sometimes this is where a lot of faiths go a little off the mark. Even, you name it. Any faith, I was born and raised in the Unification movement, but the Christian faith and others as well. So often we're teaching stuff to get a behavior out of it. We're teaching to get a result. We want that little young one to make us proud by marching into the marriage blessing one day. Or we want a certain result to see. We want them to be tithers. I remember hearing about a person that said, I really want to put a Dave Ramsey class in my local community church so that they can tithe more. I literally heard that. I was like, geez, doesn't that feel a little off? We should not teach spiritual things to get a specific agenda of a behavior. If you really believe in God's power, if you really believe that God is the change agent in people's lives, that God can heal better than any person can. God is the only one who really heals the human soul and the human heart. If you really believe that God speaks to the person's intuition and conscience far more than any human being can, then the thing we should all be hoping for is that people are connected to God. The end. And now you're in good hands. Doesn't that make sense? It's actually points to a lack of faith in us. If we are teaching to just craft a behavior out of somebody, it actually stems from a lack of faith in my own heart. That I don't really, I want to I want to superimpose my plan for this person. I don't want to just leave it up to God and that's it. That's too scary. There's so much unknown in that. Does that make sense? It's like a lot of times parents are raising their kids in a certain way with a lot of fear and insecurity, and it's actually they're trying to get a result out of their kids because they themselves as parents are insecure, and they're thinking, well, my kids reflect on me, don't they? So if they don't act a certain way, then how am I going to deal with that kind of shame? How am I going to deal with being looked down on by my neighbors or my church-going friends? How can I deal with being condescended or snickered about? This is a lot of pain and a lot of fear that parents go through. But I think that they let that anxiety and kind of influence that, well, I need my kid to succeed so that I can be accepted as a person in this world. And then the kid feels it, It's like, really, the kid just wants love, wants the parent to support them and encourage them to follow their heart. But a lot of times, kids grow up with a mix of all this other pressure going on. And as parents, or even if you're not a parent and you're thinking about your parents, you can think about, wait, maybe that was stemming from, they didn't realize it, but their own kind of drive to cover up an insecurity or to fit into society or whatever it might be. And so that ties into last week's message, because last week I really harped on, I'm urging families to not take the foundation they have just to push their kids to be quote unquote successful, right? Just focusing, look, your PhD, your 3 PhDs are not going to guide you on who to marry. Your 3 PhDs are not going to save you in that hard spot when your marriage hits a low point and you're at that last little flame of effort that you're about to throw in the towel. Those important decisions and moments and crossroads in your life are only strengthened by God. That's when you need God. And those are the most important things. So the thing we can do is to hope that our not only our parents but our kids and our neighbors and coworkers have a better and deeper connection with God. Doesn't that feel wholesome? Doesn't that feel right? God, if they're in God's hands, they're in the best hands. Let's not let my insecurity, my fear, my anxiety, my lack of any kind drive me to, no, you need to do it. And it's not just parents that do it to kids. We actually do it to coworkers. We do it to our spouses. You need to do this so that I don't look bad. And there's an amazing story, in the Bible, the story of Tamar, such an incredible story. We won't go through it in detail here, but, she is wed to a son of Judah, and something doesn't happen, and she, that one dies, and and she gets wed to another sibling, and then it doesn't work out, and God gets rid of him, and it's an amazing story where basically the sons are all like off the table now, and Tamar feels this incredible intuition from God. I need to have a child with this family. And it turns out Tamar is going to be setting up the lineage of Jesus. It's very important, right? And so she goes against all social taboos. She dresses up as a prostitute. She, has conjugal relations with, the person that was going to be her father-in-law. I mean, very racy stuff. This is the Bible, folks. This is not for the faint of heart. And yet it's in the Bible. What is it doing there? And it's so funny. I haven't heard a Christian preacher explain it well. I'm talking about traditional old world, the mainline Christian doctrine just scratches their head on this. I've been looking, and one of my favorite preachers, who I really think is an insightful guy, he said, the book of Tamar is in there to just show that God loves sinners too. So there's no importance to Tamar being such a key person that's setting up the lineage of Jesus. Why was Jesus born exactly 40 generations later from Tamar? But that's what we're here now, with new expression of truth. There's a new understanding and clarity on the Bible. Tamar is very important. She sets up the lineage of Jesus. And the reason is because she actually attended God's direction in her life. God said, God was speaking into her heart, I need you to have a lineage with this family. And she did it at the risk of her own life. What she did was punishable by death. Risked her own life. How many of us could say we would trust our daughters or anybody we know, and what they're doing on the surface just looks so wrong? It takes incredible people of faith, doesn't it, to have the kind of patience. I hope that they're following their heart. I hope they're following their conscience. And we don't want that for we don't need that in everyday life, but this was a very specific restorational duty that Tamar was fulfilling. But I'm just bringing that story in to say, look, it takes guts to be a parent or to be a person trusting others in God's hands. But we have to have that kind of faith. That's where your faith comes in. I'm praying that anybody you love, and look, a lot of times we're hoping that somebody we know changes their behavior, right? Like, I wish my spouse would just stop doing that. Or my boss would stop doing that. But you know what they actually need? They're not going to get that behavior changed. What's going to do it is healing. Imagine a gambler, and you're just like, dude, I wish you would just stop gambling. He's not going to stop gambling until the deeper problem is touched upon by God. So the people in our lives that we wish they would change, they need healing. They need the touch of God's hand in their life. And, you know, one of the nicest, most sweetest families I know, I asked the father, who's an elderly man, I said, your kids are just wonderful. You know, your kids are truth seekers. They're all married and working their marriages out. They all seem to be smart and enjoying what they do for their careers. They just seem balanced. What did you teach your kids? I want to learn what you think. And he said, you know, I really just told my kids to follow their heart. I really want them to follow their heart. You know, align up your conscience and try to do the best that God is asking you to do, but follow your heart. So parents, non-parents, spouses, whoever, the anxiety and pressure we feel, we need to deal with that on our own with God. We don't need to backseat drive and try to create results or behaviors from the people that we are surrounded by. We need to just be praying harder and asking God, how can I be feeling more of your grace and love, and how can I facilitate that in that other person's life? And that's the main goal, brothers and sisters, of spiritual education. How to be opened to intimacy and connection and healing from God. That's where a massive transformation in people's lives and souls really happen. So if there's anybody telling you that you're falling short, or you're not spiritual, or you're not saved enough, just think for a moment. Maybe they're coming at it with all that heat and all that intensity because they themselves need a little more grace. They themselves need to feel a little bit more security about who they are. You don't need to control or get other people to do anything for you to be right with God. So I hope this message can shed a little light on how we relate to each other, and how we should always just boil down the main purpose of what we educate the next generation and each other is how to be open to more intimacy with God. Until next time, God bless.